Hello and welcome to Spaced Out. I am your host, Sarah Begum, and today we have a very special guest, Dylan Taylor. So Dylan has been cited by the Harvard University, by BBC, CNN, SpaceNews, so many others. And he's here today to talk about space investments and his personal story. So Dylan, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Honored to be here.
We talked about earlier when we had a conversation that it's important for humanity to be an interplanetary species. Can you explain your thoughts on that? Why do you think it's important, and in what ways can we achieve that?
There are different arguments around it. Elon's argument is that we need to diversify consciousness, right? That we have all our eggs in one basket. We're one bad day, one asteroid away from wiping out human consciousness. So I think he's right about that, and I agree with that argument. That's not super inspiring to me, so that's not what really excites me. To me, it's more about space allowing us to being a fresh canvas to reimagine what humanity could be, sort of the potential of humanity. And to me, in order to have the right context to understand why some of the problems here on Earth are very intractable and seemingly impossible to solve, is because we don't have the right vantage point. We don't have the right context by which to see that we have everything in common, literally 99.9999% in common, and we squabble over what I consider to be very minor differences. But you can't really have that vantage point unless you sort of get out of the fishbowl. So I think space to me is more of a context or tool for transformation, where we can reimagine what it means to be human, how humanity can, essentially evolve to the next level or next vantage point. And so I think that's really the power of space. So to me, that's why I think it's important that we have that vantage point, that we increase access to space, because it allows us to reimagine what's possible. And in terms of what is necessary, there's a lot of different camps on this. I'm sort of in the camp that says we should have infrastructure in so-called free space. So these are stable orbits at so-called Lagrangian points. That's really a so-called O'Neillian picture. There are other people, including Elon and Robert Zubrin and others, who think that Mars is the solution, right? Because it's a planet, it's far enough away. I don't think these are mutually exclusive, by the way. I don't think the moon is sufficiently, I think the moon is a great outpost, but it's not sufficiently diversified. Heaven forbid anything happened to Earth, it would impact, essentially the Earth and the moon are at the same planetary system. It's, Mars is, 35 million miles away at its closest, and the moon is 200,000 miles away. Just to give you.
If you were able to, where would you go?
Oh, I would go to Alpha Centauri. I would go wherever I could go. But I think if I'm given the choice of the moon, Mars, and free space, I would probably go to the moon. Mars is a one-way ticket, obviously. It really is. Realistically, you're not coming back. So I would probably go to the moon. How about yourself? What would you do, Sarah?
If we could speed up the way rockets propelled us to various destinations out in the solar system, and maybe even to interstellar space, I'd love to go to all the planets, I'd love that. That would be so exciting. And to see if there are any signs of life. What do you think about signs of life on other planets? Do you believe in aliens, or do you believe that they exist? Or do you believe there's some sort of wormhole, that we don't have access to?
Yeah, I don't know. I think in terms of life in the universe, I think it's a statistical certainty that there is life somewhere in the universe. I think the likelihood of intelligent life is also high. The likelihood that intelligent life exists and it's visited Earth, I think, is low. I'm not a believer in that, but I'll keep an open mind. Certainly, if they had the technology to come here, they would have the technology to keep their whereabouts secret. So, but I think it's unlikely. But that being said, I don't know. I always keep an open mind on these things, but I think it was Carl Sagan that said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and I just don't see any extraordinary evidence in that direction. So I'm a skeptic.
Okay, fair enough. When you were younger, did you always know that you wanted to be a space investor?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think of myself as a space investor, ironically. I think of myself as really more of a space influencer or thought leader. I mean, investment is one of the things I do, but of course I'm running a pretty significant space company as well. It really isn't an investment company. It's really more of an operating company, but I think it's more having an impact and a role in the industry where you can help enable other very smart people and passionate people to make a difference, right? So I think of myself more as an enabler or a multiplier than an investor necessarily. But yeah, I think for me, it was really more about how do you help space reach its true potential. And just the way I think about things is I think to myself, okay, what talent, skill, and experience do I have, and what can I bring to the table? And finance is one of the areas that I have some expertise. So that's sort of one of the ways that I've impacted the industry, but hopefully there are others as well.
Well, how do you decide then, with this in mind, the fact that you want to impact humanity and the world to make it a better place and to help people, elevate people around you as well and their ideas? With that in mind, how do you decide what company to invest in?
Yeah, I think, is it a game-changing idea? That's typically one of the questions I ask myself. Is it a 10x, 100x type impact? If it's more of a company that's refining some process, that's great. I'm sure it's a good investment, but I'm typically looking for more transformational opportunities. And then of course the team, at the end of the day, it really is, I know it's a cliche, but it is the most important thing. And the reason I say that is I don't know of any business plan that's ever been written and implemented exactly the way it was written. It's always a pivot or a toggle or a tweak or a tack. And to do that, I think you need entrepreneurs and teams that really are agile and can figure things out and run into obstacles, figure out ways around them. So the team really is critical.
Is there a specific project or company that you're working with right now that you're really excited about?
Yeah, there's a ton. I mean, Voyager owns a company called Altius, and I'm really excited about Altius because they're really a pioneer in robotics servicing orbital mechanics. So like, for example, servicing satellites, cleaning up things like space debris. I personally think space debris is a challenge that is underrated in terms of it being problematic, and it's sort of a classic tragedy of the commons where incrementally the risk is low, but if everyone has that vantage point, we're going to end up causing a real problem. So I'm very passionate about what John Goff and his team at Altius are doing to solve that or help solve that. So I think that's a really interesting one. And there's a lot of other businesses. There's a female-founded business, Atomos, led by Vanessa Clark. They're trying to figure out in-space propulsion, utilizing nuclear as a solution to that. And I think that's a game changer. There's obviously some challenges from a regulatory standpoint with using nuclear, but I'm excited about that. And there are tons others, but those would be two I would highlight.
Is there something that the space industry doesn't have that you think would benefit?
Oh, lots. I mean, back to propulsion, we're in the Stone Age as it relates to propulsion in my mind. I mean, the idea that we're going to Mars with chemical rockets is just silly. We need faster, better, cheaper, deep space propulsion technologies. And a lot of those have promising sort of lab results, but we need to really scale those. So I think propulsion is one. Things like space-based energy, not only capturing energy in space, but being able to distribute that in free space and potentially even back to Earth. Things like that I think are really important. So yeah, no, there's a ton of technologies that I think we need to make some progress on.
Are there any underdog companies in the space industry that you think would benefit from more investments?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think the investment climate is pretty healthy right now. So I think most good ideas are getting funded. Europe, honestly, I feel a bit bad for European-based companies because I think the capital flows are a little less robust in Europe than certainly North America. So I think we need to solve that a bit. But I think a lot of the underdog companies that I see that are undercapitalized happen to be in Europe right now. But yeah, I think typically it's the bigger ideas that are way back-end loaded, right? That require 10, 15, 20-year payback periods. Those are the companies that are the hardest to capitalize. But I think hopefully the industry is moving towards a capital environment where some of those bigger, longer-term ideas will be funded.
Awesome. So I'm really interested in your association with the new space term. Can you explain what that is?
New space. It's one of those terms that if you ask 50 people, you'll probably get 50 different definitions. But for me, it's really just it's a counterpoint to what the opposite of that is. And that's, use the term old space or traditional space. And it's really this notion that you can solve some of these problems from a totally unique vantage point, from a first principle standpoint. I think probably the best example of that is rocket reusability. So SpaceX has cracked that nut. They're now re-landing, as we know, rocket boosters on a regular basis. For many years in the industry, traditional space thought that was foolhardy, that it wasn't possible, that it wasn't practical, that it wasn't economical. And it's not because they're not smart, and it's not because they don't understand physics. It's just because it's very hard to see a fresh perspective when you're sort of in the soup, if you will. So I think that's really what new space is really meant to identify, as sort of a fresh way of looking at some of the traditional problems within space. Yeah. Not all of new space is good. Not all of traditional space is bad. Each has their own, positives and their own unique contributions to the industry. But for me, new space, the key word for me is innovation. It's really being at the leading edge of these ideas. That's the key thing with new space in my mind.
And what are these ideas that you'd like to see happen in the near future?
Well, launch reusability was one. I think we've largely solved that. So I think that's a really important one. I think, I'm a big believer in resource utilization in space. So things like space-based manufacturing, on-orbit robotic servicing, which we talked about earlier, space-based energy. Ultimately, it's called ISRU, or in situ resource utilization. So these are technologies where you would land on the moon, extract the oxygen from the moon soil, and really start living off the land, so to speak. Those kinds of technologies are really, really critical in order for us to go back to the moon and stay for any period of time. So those are the kinds of things that I get excited about. Space tourism, of course, is everybody's favorite. Private space stations, all those things are really cool as well. But I think some of the infrastructure projects are really, really critical.
Do you think space is more accessible to people of all backgrounds today than it used to be?
Sadly, no, not yet. I think it's about the same. I hope that'll change. I did found a nonprofit called Space for Humanity, which I don't run, but I'm still on the board of, and they're doing amazing work on not only trying to globalize access to space, but really make it much more diverse and much more inclusive. So I really commend them. They've really morphed into almost a social movement around inclusion and democratization of space. So I'm very, very proud of that. It's led by Rachel Lyons, who's just a superstar. So I think that's part of the answer, but I think we're still we're still, I think, very North American centric. Certainly when you look at space tourism, notwithstanding the fact that it's not $50 million to go to the International Space Station when you buy a ticket on Virgin Galactic, $250,000 to most people is a lot of money. To a lot of people, it's an afterthought. They don't even think about it. But that's a very, very thin slice of humanity. So I think we have a long ways to go to where space really is for everybody. But I think we're spending a lot of time talking about it, and I think a lot of the smarter, more influential people in the industry see it as an issue, which that's progress. But we still have a lot of work to do.
So I want to get to know you better as a person, Dylan. I mean, this exceptional human being you are today, what shaped you? Was there something that you're very fond of from your childhood memories that you can share with us today?
Well, I think importantly, childhood links to space. So my lifelong passion has been space, and I read a book. I think you and I might have chatted about it the first time we got to know each other, called The Last Lecture, which is an interesting book, and it's sort of how to find purpose in your life and how to find joy in your life. And basically it challenges you to sort of probe your early childhood years, because that's typically where you're going to find the answer to that. So I won't spoil the book for people who want to read it, but I think space really was born out of those early years for me, and that's certainly what I'm super passionate about. It's my life's mission, and so linking sort of that early childhood passion to what I'm doing today, I think is really important. In terms of professional growth or personal growth, I think for me it's reading. I've read a lot of great books that impacted my life, great mentors, great friends. I'm a big believer that you're sort of the average of the people you spend the most time with, right? So surrounding yourself with people who are, grateful and, abundant thinkers as opposed to scarcity thinkers. I think that's really important. So those are some of the things that, by the way, just to be perfectly clear, I appreciate the compliment, but I'm not a perfect human being, and I'm still trying to figure it all out. So I'm not here to say that I'm, standing at the mountaintop looking down on everybody else. That's not the case at all.
Well, everyone's always, working to be a better human being. There's always something that you can be better on. But you've done quite a lot. You've accomplished a lot in your life, and those achievements, I'm sure you're very grateful for, and that you appreciate, and I'm sure there's so much more that you want to do.
Mm-hmm. Oh, without question. I feel like I'm just getting started. Yeah, I think part of it is, though, I think, as you've said, Sarah, I think it's less about personal achievement, and it's more about how do you make an impact? What's your legacy? What's your purpose, and are you really impacting that? So I'm much more interested in having people around me that I care about do well and get accolades than myself. The whole notion of reflected glory as opposed to personal glory, I think that's the stage of life that I'm in right now.
Well, that's great. I'm really interested to know, how do you shape the day?
A couple of highlights, maybe. I think it includes meditation, which I'm a big believer in. So I've been doing that for many years. It includes things like gratitude. What are you grateful for? I do some journaling, sort of reflection on the day, what I want to accomplish, kind of what intention I want to show up with. And then I typically work out, get an exercise in, and then I dive into my day. Yeah, that's typically the way I approach it. I try not to importantly, perhaps, I try not to turn my phone on. In terms of accessing the network, I try not to enable my phone, take it off airplane mode, if you will, until I'm done with the routine, which is tricky, but that's what I try to do.
Do you usually stick to those?
Yeah, I try to stick to the routine as best I can. I do have sort of a shorter version of it if I'm traveling or something like that. That, like, for example, part of it includes, I don't know if you're aware, or I've used, I'm sure you have, just given your life balance, a vision board. I don't travel with that, obviously. So, that's not part of my routine when I'm on the road, but it is when I'm at home. There is some kind of puts and takes, but for the most part, it's pretty common. I think the journaling is really a good place to do sort of the brain dump to make sure you're not missing anything or losing anything in terms of but I try to do that after I meditate, because ironically, even though you're not supposed to be thinking during meditation, we all know that that's typically the opposite is true, right? You have all you're really doing is being aware of what you're thinking about. That's really the nature of meditation.
Or focusing on your breathing, which then makes the thoughts. Yeah. So I'd love to know what you think the future of space exploration is, and why do you think space exploration is important to shape humanity on Earth and make it here?
Well, I think we're in a bit of an existential crisis right now as humans. I don't think we fully understand the nature of our conflicts, and we have sort of this tension that's built up and has persisted really since, any of us have been alive, right? Punctuated by world wars, punctuated by Cold Wars, punctuated by China-US conflict. So we haven't really had an opportunity to get out of our angst, filled world. And my thesis is part of this is we just don't have the right vantage point. We don't have the right context. So I think it's important that we go to space so that more and more people have that epiphany and more people can impact life here on Earth positively. So I think that's all important. The other thing that I tell people, and I do quite a bit of outreach to other influencers in other industries. I do a dinner series and some other things I do really to influence influencers in other industries. And what I try to convince them of is that space is happening. This train has left the station. We are going to space. We're going to space in bigger and bigger numbers. It will be commercialized. It will be democratized. So I'm a big believer that we should shape that. We should have an authentic conversation about what we want that to look like. So it doesn't happen to us, but we help shape that future. And I think the right way to shape a future is to have a lot of dialogue around it. And that's one thing our society is not very good at right now. We're talking sort of past each other on a lot of issues. And there's very little authentic debate or dialogue. So I think that's another key challenge that we have is we just need to, you can't have a robust, thoughtful conversation in 140 characters or with a meme or things like that. You have to sit down authentically as humans and really have a conversation, thoughtful conversation over weeks and months to get to the right answer. So I think we need to get back to that as well.
So do you think diplomacy and unity would, in essence, propel our space missions to, further explore what's amongst the stars?
Yeah, I almost think yes, but I think it's almost the opposite. I think space will hopefully help us be more unified. And that's why I tell people, a lot of the narrative around space is that it's, escape from Earth. It's the billionaires, sort of the so-called, my friend Rick Tumlinson wrote a piece called The Elysium Effect, where it's, all the rich people will live in space and I see it the exact opposite. I see space as where a lot of the heavy industry can be, and the Earth will be like a national park. It'll be like an oasis. And people will understand the treasure that Earth is, because they'll have the vantage point of seeing it from space. Either streaming to their iPhone with companies that, building kind of real-time 4D capability, or going to space themselves, or knowing people who went to space that they can relate to, things like that.
Okay, last question, because I'm aware we have 1 minute left.
Yes, that's right.
So someone from a completely different background or industry who, wanted to get involved, what advice would you give them? Do they need to train? Do they need to study? Do they need to just apply their existing skill sets? Like, what can they do?
Right. I think it's the last thing you mentioned. I think find a good mentor, find somebody who cares about you and cares about your success and who can plug you into the industry. But I think space is it's past the point where you have to be a fighter pilot or a a traditional aerospace engineer. You can be a cook, you can be a communicator, you can be an author, you can be anything. Space needs all of that at this point in time. So I think I would say leverage your skill set and your passion, but find a good mentor in the industry who can get you plugged in.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Dylan. This has been very valuable, and I can't wait to send it to you. I can't wait to share your message. It's actually so relevant. It's very much along the lines of world peace. You go to space to understand and appreciate what this beautiful jewel, in the solar system is. And then you get to share that with all of your brothers and sisters on Earth. We are all Earthlings at the end of the day,
Indeed. Well said. I totally agree. Well, it's been a pleasure, Sarah. Thank you for the opportunity to be on your show. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Have
you.
an amazing day.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.